There's a hidden pattern shaping everything you live, an invisible quantum code translating thought into form, emotion into reality. You can feel it every time life repeats the same story under a different name, every time change feels close but somehow slips away. It isn't fate, it's a silent mechanism operating beneath awareness, scripting your choices before you make them. Yet within that mechanism lies something extraordinary, something that, once understood, can shift the way you experience everything. And that's exactly what we're about to uncover. Most of what you call you isn't truly yours. It's a collection of codes, tiny invisible sequences of mental instructions written long before you could choose what to believe. They run quietly, shaping the tone of your thoughts, the limits of your emotions, and the patterns you repeat without realizing. This is the silent programming of the human mind, not a conspiracy of others, but a choreography of forgotten experiences still dancing in the background of awareness. Imagine your consciousness as a living laboratory. On the surface, experiments happen, decisions, desires, conflicts, dreams. But below that surface lies the operating system that decides how every experiment begins and ends. You might think you're freely choosing what to focus on, but studies in cognitive science show that nearly 95% of your decisions come from automatic patterns, not from deliberate thinking. The brain, to conserve energy, recycles the familiar. That's why people often say, "I thought I had changed," only to find themselves back where they started. The code hasn't been rewritten, only rearranged at the surface. This programming doesn't announce itself. It hides behind your voice of reason, pretending to be you. It tells you what's possible, what's dangerous, and what's worth loving. When you hesitate to take a risk, that hesitation isn't born in the moment. It's a stored vibration, an emotional residue encoded as safety. When you crave approval, that isn't vanity. It's a memory of survival from a time when belonging equaled existence. The code isn't evil, it's ancient. Its purpose was once protection, but as consciousness evolves, what once protected begins to imprison. Pause for a second. Notice the thoughts passing through your mind right now. Most of them aren't freshly created, they're recycled echoes. They orbit around the same gravitational center, the version of you that your nervous system believes is safe. The mind doesn't prefer truth, it prefers familiarity. It keeps tuning the same frequency even when that frequency distorts your reality. Neuroscience calls this predictive coding. The brain doesn't see the world as it is. It predicts what it expects to see and filters everything else. This means that perception isn't passive, it's generative. You're not just observing reality, you're constructing it from old data. The quantum implication is staggering. The observer effect isn't just happening in the lab, it's happening in you, constantly. In practical terms, this is why transformation feels so hard. You can read, meditate, affirm, but if the underlying vibration remains the same, you'll simply reassemble your reality around the same inner frequency. Like a software program looping the same algorithm, your life reboots with the same parameters each morning. You think you're choosing new experiences, but you're mostly choosing new variations of the same emotional field. You can detect the code by noticing your loops. Each time life feels like déjà vu, each time you say, "Why does this always happen to me?" You're touching the trace of the program. It's not karma, not fate, it's informational inertia. The energy of repetition keeps itself alive through your attention. The more you resist the loop, the more you feed it. The code survives through focus, like a parasite thriving on observation without awareness. Now, try an experiment. Close your eyes and sense your current inner weather. What's the emotional temperature? Warm, neutral, heavy? Don't name it, just feel its frequency. Then ask quietly, who taught me to feel this way about life? You may not hear an answer in words, but your body knows. A subtle image, a face or a sound may arise. That's not random, that's data, an entry point to the code. If you watch closely, you'll notice that every recurring emotion has a timeline behind it. Anxiety may trace back to a first moment of disapproval. Guilt may echo a forgotten rule you never questioned. When the origin is unseen, The emotion repeats endlessly, camouflaged as personality. But personality is just the interface of the deeper code. It's how the invisible translates itself into behavior. Here's where quantum understanding becomes practical. In physics, particles remain in superposition until observed, their possibilities waiting for a lens. Similarly, your unconscious patterns exist as probabilities until consciousness observes them. The act of observation changes their state. Awareness collapses the old wave of repetition and opens a new one. That's not philosophy. It's the mechanics of perception. This is why silence is so powerful. Not because silence is peaceful, but because silence interrupts the automatic. When you become still, the background code becomes audible. You begin to see thoughts not as truth, but as transmissions. In that moment, the hidden program starts to lose authority. The real challenge isn't to delete the code, it's to understand it. Each line of programming once had a reason. Fear once protected, control once promised safety, judgment once gave direction. When you see their original intent, compassion replaces resistance and compassion itself becomes a new command. The old sequence begins to rewrite organically. And when that happens, a subtle shift unfolds. Instead of the mind programming you, consciousness begins to program the mind. That reversal, tiny, almost imperceptible, is the beginning of liberation. You might already sense it, that quiet moment when a thought arises, but you no longer follow it automatically. That's the crack in the code, the opening through which new information can enter. It's the same threshold where the next realization waits, the one that explains why, even when you try to change, something still pulls you back. You've probably felt it. The strange gravity that pulls you back into the same stories, even after you've sworn they were finished. You meet the same type of person, react with the same defense, reach the same emotional dead end. You tell yourself, this time it will be different, but somehow it isn't. What's happening is not moral failure or lack of willpower. It's a quantum error, a subtle distortion in the field of consciousness that causes the same information to collapse again and again into the same outcome. Imagine reality as a feedback loop of vibration and observation. Each emotion, thought, and belief you hold emits a frequency. That frequency doesn't just describe your inner world, it informs the field around you. The universe, at its most fundamental level, is an intelligent mirror responding to coherence. When the signal you send out is identical to yesterday's, it returns identical experiences. It's not punishment, it's resonance. The past repeats because your present is still coded with its frequency. Quantum physics has a name for this kind of phenomenon: path dependence. Once a system stabilizes in a certain pattern of probability, it tends to remain there unless an external force shifts its state. Your consciousness operates in a similar way. The external force you're waiting for, a miracle, a new beginning, divine intervention, can only arise from inside when awareness introduces new information. Until then, the system defaults to the familiar pattern, rebooting your life with the same software every morning. Think of it as a mental echo chamber. Each thought triggers an emotion. That emotion reaffirms the thought, and together they regenerate the same neural pathways. The body then memorizes the chemical state of that emotion, so even when you consciously want change, the body unconsciously craves what it knows. That's why transformation feels like withdrawal. You're not just leaving habits, you're leaving an identity built on repetition. Here's the paradox: the more you fight the repetition, the more energy you give to the same pattern. Resistance strengthens the wave. In quantum terms, attention is observation, and observation collapses probability into form. So when you keep watching the same emotional frequency, worrying about it, analyzing it, judging it, you keep it alive. You become both the scientist and the experiment, constantly remeasuring the same outcome. Now take a breath and try this quietly. Notice one recurring situation in your life that feels like a loop. Don't overthink it. Let the first one that appears be the right one. Feel the emotion connected to it. Where does it live in your body? The chest, the stomach, the throat? Stay with it for a few seconds, not to analyze, but to sense its vibration. That feeling is the quantum signature of the past replaying itself through you. It's not the event that repeats, it's the frequency. This is the quantum error, believing you're reacting to the present when in truth you're resonating with memory. The signal hasn't updated, so reality keeps streaming the same scene. The moment consciousness identifies with the old vibration, time folds. Past and present merge, and your perception becomes a closed circuit. That's why months or years can pass, yet the inner story feels unchanged, because energetically, the same data is being rendered again and again. Neuroscience offers a mirror for this. The brain loves prediction more than truth. It constantly replays stored patterns because familiarity equals efficiency. The unknown consumes energy, so the system prefers the known, even if the known is painful. The mind seeking safety becomes its own jailer. To interrupt the loop, something counterintuitive is required, not control, but awareness without reaction. Awareness is like a quantum measurement that doesn't collapse the wave. When you observe the old pattern without emotional charge, without trying to fix, judge, or escape, it begins to lose coherence. The frequency can no longer stabilize, and new probabilities become available. Try to recall the last time you noticed yourself becoming an old version of you mid-conversation. The tone, the defensiveness, the posture. In that split second of recognition, you weren't the program, you were the observer. That flicker of consciousness is the real reset button. It's not dramatic, but it's precise. Every time you witness the pattern without feeding it, the neural and energetic loop weakens. The code starts to rewrite itself. Quantum coherence, the alignment between your inner state and outer experience, requires a certain purity of signal. When your field is filled with contradictory frequencies, fear and desire, control and surrender, the wave interferes with itself, creating static. That static manifests as confusion, chaos, or déjà vu. The same argument, the same failure, the same emotional climate. Each is a manifestation of interference patterns in your field. But when awareness holds steady, something begins to synchronize. The wave no longer collapses prematurely. You start to perceive subtle differences in familiar situations. People respond differently. Opportunities emerge where before there was only repetition. The field reorganizes, not because you forced it, but because you stopped coding it with the past. At this point, time becomes fluid again. You notice that what you called the past isn't behind you. It's still vibrating in the present until consciousness redefines it. The moment you release identification with the old frequency, the information field updates. What you used to call fate now responds like a living mirror to your state of coherence. The so-called quantum error dissolves, the instant observation becomes pure when you no longer project yesterday's vibration into today's wave function. And in that clarity, something remarkable reveals itself. The field is not static, it's responsive. It's always waiting for new input from the silent center of awareness. That's the doorway to what comes next. The realization that there is an invisible field surrounding you, listening not to your words or intentions, but to your internal frequency. It is the field that responds, faithfully and precisely, to the vibration you hold. Everything you experience, every coincidence, delay, opportunity, or repetition is not random. It's the echo of an invisible field, responding with mathematical precision to your internal state. Modern physics calls it a field of potential, but consciousness experiences it as reality itself. You don't live in the universe lives through your frequency. You've felt this before, even if you couldn't name it. A day when everything flows, when people call at the right moment, doors open without effort, ideas appear out of nowhere. And then another day where nothing works, where every step feels like wading through invisible resistance. The difference isn't luck or circumstance, it's coherence. The field surrounding you is constantly adjusting to the signal you emit. Quantum experiments have shown that particles exist as possibilities until observed. But what few realize is that observation isn't limited to the eyes. It includes every vibration of consciousness. Your emotions, thoughts, and subtle attitudes are forms of observation. They collapse the infinite potential of the field into the specific version of reality you inhabit. You aren't just influencing your environment, you're continuously coding it. If you could see this field, you'd notice how it mirrors even the smallest shift in your inner tone. The moment you feel gratitude, the geometry around you reorganizes, creating coherence in the probabilities that shape your experiences. When you spiral into fear or resentment, the same field contracts, aligning reality with that tension. It's not moral, it's mechanical. The universe isn't judging your state, it's responding to it. Imagine throwing two stones into a still pond. Each creates ripples, and where they intersect, new patterns emerge. That's how your internal frequencies interact with the quantum field. Thoughts are ripples, emotions are ripples. When your mind and heart vibrate out of phase, when you think one thing but feel another, the interference patterns create static. The water becomes chaotic and the reflection distorts. What you see as problems in your life are often these interference zones. Now, take a breath and sense your body. Without changing anything, just notice the subtle tension beneath your awareness. Perhaps a pressure behind the eyes, a heaviness in the chest, or a pulse in the stomach. Each sensation carries information about your frequency in this moment. You are reading your field in real time. The most important realization is this: the field doesn't respond to what you say you want, it responds to what you are. Your conscious mind might declare abundance, love, peace, but if your nervous system is broadcasting anxiety or scarcity, the field mirrors that vibration instead. That's why affirmations without coherence rarely work. The signal is split between intention and emotion. Coherence begins when thought, emotion, and energy align. The heart and brain start to oscillate in harmony, producing a measurable electromagnetic pattern. Studies from institutes dedicated to heart-brain research show that when the heart enters a coherent rhythm, the entire body field stabilizes. Subjectively, it feels like calm alertness, presence without tension. Objectively, it reorganizes the space around you. Encounters shift, timing synchronizes, resistance dissolves. Think of the field as an orchestra tuning itself to your inner conductor. If your inner rhythm is chaotic, the symphony around you plays out of tune. But when the conductor, your consciousness, becomes steady, the instruments follow naturally. You don't have to control the musicians, you only need to hold the tempo. Sometimes, though, the signal you send is inherited, not chosen. Old emotions stored in the body continue to broadcast frequencies long after the original story has faded. These emotional residues act like background noise, distorting the clarity of your field. That's why awareness, not effort, is essential. You can't force the noise away, but you can listen until it dissolves. Observation, when free from judgment, releases trapped energy back into flow. Try this quietly. Bring to mind a situation that feels stuck, something that refuses to move no matter how much effort you apply. Instead of thinking why, sense how it feels in the body. Where does that stuckness live? Now soften around it, like widening the container. Don't push it away, let it be seen. In that simple act of awareness, the field receives new input. The old vibration begins to unwind because consciousness has stopped identifying with it. The invisible field is exquisitely sensitive to inner stillness. When you drop into presence, reality adjusts almost imperceptibly, but unmistakably. Attention eases, a call arrives, a synchronicity appears. The change may seem external, but it's the field recalibrating to your new coherence. Over time, this becomes less mystical and more obvious. Outer events are delayed reflections of inner alignment. In quantum terms, coherence reduces entropy. In human terms, presence reduces confusion. You become the stabilizing center around which reality organizes. It's not that the universe suddenly favors you, it's that you've stopped sending mixed signals. Yet here lies the paradox. Many people, upon sensing this truth, try to control their state, to maintain perfect positivity, to police every thought. But control introduces tension, and tension distorts the signal. The field doesn't need perfection. It needs authenticity. Even sadness, when felt fully without resistance, vibrates coherently. It's the denial of what is that fractures the wave. There's a moment, a quiet threshold, when you realize the field isn't separate from you. It breathes with you, learns from you, mirrors you. And once you sense that connection, something remarkable happens. The need to force outcomes begins to fade. You start to move with the field instead of against it, guided by a rhythm older than thought. And as that rhythm stabilizes, a deeper understanding begins to surface. Every emotion carries a specific frequency. Some frequencies harmonize with the field, others distort it. The next realization is not about the field itself, but about how emotion, the vibration of your being, can either align or misalign your entire reality. Every emotion you experience is not just a feeling, it's a frequency broadcast. It travels through the invisible field like a tone resonating through an infinite instrument, adjusting the geometry of what you call reality. Most people don't realize how precise this mechanism is. The universe isn't listening to your thoughts as words. It's tuning itself to your vibration, and when that vibration becomes distorted, your outer world reflects the distortion back, as faithfully as a mirror warped by heat. There's a moment when coherence breaks, a tiny fracture in the alignment between your mind, body, and field. It often begins with a subtle emotion, guilt for something unresolved, fear of what might come, or doubt about what's unfolding. Each of these emotions carries a distinct electromagnetic signature. They are not abstract moods, they are measurable patterns of information. When they dominate your field, the code that shapes your life begins to desynchronize. Imagine a radio slightly off its frequency. The signal still comes through, but with static. You hear fragments of the music, yet the noise makes it impossible to feel its full harmony. That's what happens when fear, shame, or control dominate your vibration. You still manifest reality, but it's full of interference, misunderstandings, repeated obstacles, mixed outcomes. The signal of consciousness becomes incoherent, and so the field returns a reality of equal distortion. At first, it's easy to misinterpret this. You might think the world is against you, that destiny is testing you, that chaos is random. But what's actually occurring is more intimate. Your field is broadcasting two frequencies at once. One says, "I want expansion," while another whispers, "I don't feel safe expanding." The result is conflict made visible. Every contradiction inside becomes a contradiction outside. Take a moment to sense this directly. Think of an intention you've been holding, something you say you desire deeply. Now ask yourself quietly, what emotion vibrates underneath that desire? Is it trust or tension, hope or hurry? The emotional tone beneath the intention determines its magnetic signature. If you want peace but vibrate anxiety, the field mirrors the anxiety, not the word peace. The language of reality is energy, not vocabulary. When guilt and doubt become chronic frequencies, they act like signal jammers. They scatter the coherence that connects you to the field. You might notice it as fatigue, confusion, or a sense that nothing flows naturally. In truth, the flow never stops. The signal simply becomes out of tune with it. The harder you try to force change, the more noise you create. Energy spent on control is energy removed from alignment. Physics describes coherence as a state where waves move in harmony, amplifying each other's energy. Incoherence, on the other hand, occurs when waves interfere and cancel themselves out. Emotional frequencies behave the same way. When you carry opposing vibrations, love mixed with fear, gratitude mixed with resentment, the waves cancel, and your reality feels like it's dissolving under your feet. You can't build stability on contradictory frequencies. This is why thinking positive often fails. The thought may be high frequency, but if it floats above an emotional foundation of worry or unworthiness, the field registers the dissonance. You can't override energy with intellect. The code responds to coherence, not concepts. To realign, you must feel the signal, not merely think it. Try this subtle experiment. Close your eyes and imagine tuning your emotional state as if it were a musical note. Don't force it higher, just listen. Notice which part of your body hums at the lowest pitch. It could be the stomach tightening, the chest compressing, the jaw locking. That's where misalignment lives. Now, instead of resisting, soften around it. Let it vibrate. The moment you stop trying to silence the discord, it begins to retune itself. Emotion, when fully felt without judgment, seeks coherence naturally. It's not the negative emotion itself that misaligns your reality. It's the resistance to it. Guilt only becomes distortion when you try to escape it. Fear becomes interference when you deny it. Each emotion is just information, asking to be integrated back into the whole. When consciousness allows the feeling without turning it into a story, the trapped frequency dissolves and the field recalibrates to harmony. Think of the universe as a living feedback system. It doesn't reward or punish, it synchronizes. When your vibration shifts, the system updates. You can't fake it. The feedback is immediate and exact. That's why pretending to be calm never works. The field doesn't hear the act, only the resonance beneath it. But when calm arises authentically, even for a moment, reality bends toward it like iron filings to a magnet. As coherence returns, life begins to respond differently. Conversations that once triggered you become neutral. Decisions feel lighter. Synchronicities increase, not because the universe suddenly favors you, but because your internal signal has become stable. The outer world stops arguing with your inner frequency. Still, there's an even deeper layer to this process, something that lies beyond emotion itself. It's what happens when all frequencies, even the harmonious ones, quiet down for an instant. When the noise stops, consciousness accesses pure information. It's not the absence of feeling, but the space between feelings, the still point where the old code dissolves and a new one begins to emerge. That is the doorway to silence, not as emptiness but as the original source code of reality itself. There is a moment when the mind finally stops trying to solve itself. At first, it feels like failure, like giving up on the search for answers. But then, something almost imperceptible begins to occur, a quiet widening inside you, as if a door has been standing open the whole time, and only now you've noticed the breeze coming through it. That doorway is silence. And silence is not the absence of thought, it's the access point to the code that creates thought itself. The human mind is an extraordinary machine. It can calculate, imagine, plan, defend, and remember. But its greatest limitation is that it can't see the field it's swimming in. It keeps trying to fix the turbulence on the surface, unaware that the stillness underneath is what holds the real power. When you sit in silence, you stop editing the quantum stream. You stop collapsing it prematurely into the same predictable form. For a brief instant, consciousness returns to its original state, pure potential, before identity, before story. Many traditions have tried to describe this stillness, but words tend to pollute it. Silence isn't meditation in the conventional sense. It's not breathing techniques or visualizations. It's a kind of conscious shutdown, an intentional power-off of the mental engine. It happens when awareness stops chasing the next thought and begins to listen between them. In that interval, time softens. The usual noise of should and why dissolves. You aren't thinking silence, you are silence. Quantum theory hints at this. The field of infinite possibilities collapses only when observed. But what happens when the observer rests? What happens when consciousness, instead of projecting, simply abides? The answer is paradoxical. Reality stops solidifying around old codes. The patterns that required your constant observation to exist begin to dissolve, not through effort, but through neglect. In the same way that a software glitch disappears when the process is closed, the old program fades when awareness stops feeding it. Try noticing this right now. Close your eyes for a moment. Instead of fighting your thoughts, watch where one thought ends and the next begins. In that tiny gap, there's no identity, no name, no past. Just awareness without content. It's so subtle that most people skip over it, but if you linger there even for half a second, something astonishing happens. The nervous system relaxes and the field around you adjusts. You're no longer generating distortion, you're broadcasting coherence without effort. The silence isn't empty. It's densely alive, full of information the thinking mind can't decode. It's as if reality itself is whispering in a frequency too fine for words. When you enter this silence, you begin to perceive that consciousness is not locked inside your skull. It extends like a vibration into the quantum field. The boundaries between inner and outer start to blur. You can feel your awareness stretching beyond the body, touching the energy that animates everything. It's in this silence that the old code, the unconscious programming that repeats your past, starts to reveal itself. Not through logic, but through direct recognition. Sometimes it appears as a physical sensation, a sudden emotion, or a clear insight that seems to come from nowhere. The silence doesn't erase the old code by force, it exposes it in the light of awareness until it loses the power to operate unseen. The act of seeing becomes the act of rewriting. Stillness then is not passive. It's the most dynamic state consciousness can enter. It's where new information begins to flow in from the field, data from a level of intelligence beyond the habitual mind. That's why breakthroughs, intuitive knowing, and deep healing often occur not during activity, but in the pause afterward. Silence is the quantum laboratory where new realities are born, but it's also the space where the ego feels most threatened. The mind has built its identity on motion, on defining, predicting, comparing. When you rest in silence, you temporarily unplug from that identity. The mind interprets this as danger because it cannot measure who you are without the noise, so it resists. It invents distractions, discomfort, even sleepiness. This is normal. It's the system rebooting as it learns that existence continues even when the program stops running. Over time, something beautiful begins to occur. The moments of silence extend naturally. You start to crave them, not as escape, but as homecoming. Everyday reality begins to reorganize around this new frequency. Conversations slow down, intuition sharpens, the gap between thought and action widens, allowing wisdom to move first. You start responding to life instead of reacting to it. In that subtle shift, the architecture of consciousness rearranges itself. You stop being the programmed mind and begin to sense yourself as the programmer, the observer of the code rather than the code in motion. Silence becomes not a refuge but a control room from which reality is recalibrated. And within that quiet control room, something begins to whisper, not a voice, but a realization. The code you've been searching for is not written outside you. It exists in the space between your thoughts, in the intervals you've learned to ignore. The next revelation emerges from here, the understanding that the quantum code itself is hidden in that emptiness, and when you recognize it, you stop being the programming and become the programmer. There comes a point in every journey of awareness when the search begins to collapse under its own weight. You've looked for answers in books, in teachers, in experiences that promise transcendence. You've tried to reprogram the mind, shift beliefs, elevate vibrations, but then silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the silence of exhaustion when the seeker finally stops reaching outward. And it's exactly there, in that pause between thoughts, that something extraordinary begins to reveal itself. The code you've been chasing has never been out there. It's been the invisible thread holding every moment of consciousness together. Between one thought and the next, there is no identity, no timeline, no memory. Just pure awareness, clear, unfragmented, untouched by emotion or logic. That gap, so subtle it's often missed, is the quantum interval where creation renews itself. Every reality, every version of you, every potential outcome arises from that infinitesimal still point. It's the pulse of the universe inside the human mind. When thoughts come too quickly, the code remains hidden. The stream of mental noise acts like static, covering a pure frequency. But as the rhythm slows, as attention begins to notice the spaces rather than the words, a different kind of perception awakens. You start to sense that consciousness isn't continuous in the way you imagined. It flickers, like frames of light projected on a screen. Between those frames lies the unmanifest, the timeless zone where all potential exists before taking form. Science mirrors this mystery in its own way. In quantum physics, particles don't move smoothly through space. They appear and disappear, existing as probabilities between moments of observation. Consciousness does the same. Each thought is an observation collapsing infinite potential into one version of reality. And between thoughts, when observation pauses, you return to the infinite field from which all realities arise. That gap is not nothingness, it's the womb of everything. This is why ancient mystics spoke of enlightenment as seeing the space between. They weren't describing an abstract metaphor, they were pointing toward a measurable shift in perception. When awareness stabilizes in the interval between thoughts, identification with the mind dissolves. You're no longer caught in the stream, you're watching the river flow from the source. In that instant, life stops being something that happens to you and becomes something that happens through you. Try to feel this directly for a moment. Let a thought arise, maybe something simple like, "I'm reading." Then notice when that thought ends. Before the next one begins, there's a fraction of a second where nothing is defined. That's the space. Stay there. Don't try to hold it, it can't be held. Just recognize it as awareness noticing itself. It feels vast, yet intimate, empty, yet full. That's where the code lives, in the interval where the observer and the observed are one. Every time you touch that space, even for a breath, something in the deeper structure of your consciousness updates. The nervous system relaxes into coherence, the field aligns, and new possibilities start to arrange themselves quietly in your favor. It's not mystical, it's mechanical. The universe mirrors your level of awareness, and when awareness rests in its own source, reality reorganizes to match that purity. This is what it means to become the programmer instead of the program. Thoughts, emotions, identities, they're all lines of code executing automatically. But the space between thoughts is where you access the operating system itself. You can't rewrite the script by fighting it from within. You rewrite it by entering the silence that precedes it. From there, the old lines begin to recompile naturally. The same life situations may appear, but they respond differently because the consciousness behind them has changed frequency. At first, this revelation can feel disorienting. The mind, accustomed to doing, doesn't know how to exist in the gap. It might rush to fill the silence, to name it, to turn it into another method. But the code resists capture. The moment you try to analyze it, it vanishes. Because analysis is another thought, another vibration of the old program. The only way to perceive the code is to be the stillness itself. Observation without interference. Awareness aware of awareness. With practice, the gap expands, not in duration but in presence. You begin to live from that silent space, even while thoughts and actions continue. It's like realizing that music isn't just made of notes, but of the pauses that give the notes meaning. The pauses are where the beauty lives. In the same way, the space between thoughts is what makes consciousness creative. It's the unspoken rhythm that animates every experience. And the more you rest in that rhythm, the more transparent reality becomes. You start to perceive that every event, every interaction, is a temporary modulation of that silent field. Even emotion transforms. It becomes movement, not resistance. Fear, joy, sadness, all are expressions of the same quantum pulse vibrating through the gap. Then, something even more subtle begins to occur. As you live closer to that inner stillness, the flow of life starts to reverse. Instead of trying to change what you feel to change your circumstances, the field begins to change your circumstances because your inner vibration has shifted first. Transformation stops being an act of will and becomes a natural byproduct of alignment. And this is where the next realization emerges, the reversal of the flow itself. You begin to see that you never had to force change from the outside. Reality was always waiting for you to release control from within. For most of your life, you've been taught to work from the outside in. You chase better circumstances, improved habits, higher frequencies, new beginnings. You try to change what you live by changing what you feel. But what if the direction of flow has always been reversed? What if reality is not something that reacts to your actions, but something that reflects your state of being, instantly, effortlessly, with absolute precision? Here is the twist most people never see. Transformation doesn't begin when you force change. It begins when you stop resisting what is. The code that rewrites reality is not installed through willpower, but through release. The more you try to manage life from the surface, through analysis, control, or emotional effort, the more entangled you become in the very field you're trying to escape. True change happens when consciousness flips its axis, when energy stops flowing outward toward control and begins flowing inward toward awareness. Imagine a river that's been dammed for years. The water, desperate to move, crashes against its own barriers, generating turbulence. That's the human mind in its default state, trying to force clarity through resistance. But the moment the dam is lifted, the flow reverses direction. The current returns to its natural intelligence, and what once felt like chaos reorganizes into effortless movement. The same principle governs consciousness. You don't need to push life forward. You need to stop holding it back. This reversal is not philosophical. It's energetic. In the habitual mode, attention flows outward, to problems, desires, comparisons, and plans. The mind projects its contents into the field, trying to shape reality through control. But projection strengthens separation. It tells the field, I am incomplete. I must act upon what's outside me. And the field, loyal to coherence, mirrors that frequency back. You live inside an echo of striving. The more you chase, the more distance you create between yourself and what you seek. Reversing the flow means bringing attention back to its origin. Instead of projecting energy outward, you allow it to collapse back into presence. Awareness turns toward itself. The observer stops manipulating the observed and begins to rest as the source of both. In that inversion, the field responds instantly, because the split between you and reality dissolves. Life begins to organize from the inside out. You've felt glimpses of this reversal before, moments when you stopped trying to fix or explain, and suddenly everything aligned. Maybe it was a conversation that resolved itself when you dropped the need to be right, or a decision that became clear the moment you stopped analyzing it. That quiet ease wasn't coincidence, it was coherence. When the mind stops interfering, the quantum field self-corrects. Reality, left to its own intelligence, always seeks equilibrium. Now try sensing this directly. Let your awareness rest on a single issue that's been looping in your life. Instead of trying to understand it, soften your focus and feel the subtle energy you're projecting toward it, perhaps tension, urgency, or mental noise. Notice how that energy pushes outward, as if trying to grab hold of the situation. Now, imagine reversing that movement, not by pulling it back, but by releasing it entirely, allowing the energy to flow inward toward stillness. In that instant, your field shifts polarity. The pressure dissolves. What was out there begins to feel like an extension of your inner space. This is the quantum equivalent of flipping the magnet. When you stop chasing, you become magnetic. The field doesn't need instruction, it only needs resonance. By releasing resistance, you align with the inherent intelligence that organizes everything. Paradoxically, surrender is the most powerful form of action in the universe. At a biological level, this reversal has measurable effects. When you release control, the nervous system exits the survival mode that keeps perception narrow. Heart and brain waves synchronize. Coherence increases. The electromagnetic field of the body expands, becoming a more efficient transmitter and receiver of information. The universe doesn't just hear you, it is you, vibrating in harmony with your relaxed awareness. But the mind resists this simplicity. It believes progress requires tension, that surrender equals passivity. Yet every genuine breakthrough, scientific, artistic, or spiritual, has always emerged from a state of release. The mathematician sees the solution only after stepping away from the equation. The artist discovers truth in the pause between strokes. The mystic finds God not in control, but in surrender. Reversing the flow also changes your relationship with emotion. Instead of trying to manipulate how you feel, you allow feelings to move through you. The energy that once fueled resistance becomes creative power. Anger transforms into clarity. Grief becomes depth. Fear turns into presence. The field doesn't delete emotion, it alchemizes it. You start realizing that every emotional charge was never meant to be solved. It was meant to be transmuted through awareness. From this new orientation, action arises naturally. You no longer act to change reality. You act as reality changing itself. Choices unfold as extensions of coherence, not reactions to lack. There's no calculation, no anticipation, just the unmistakable sensation of flow. Life stops feeling like something to manage and starts behaving like something intelligent that you're co-creating with every breath. The most profound evidence of this reversal isn't external success or mystical experience. It's the quiet knowing that you no longer need to strive. You feel aligned with something infinitely larger, something that moves through you with precision and care. That's the current of the quantum field flowing back to its source, through your awareness, through your body, through your choices. And as this flow stabilizes, something even subtler begins to happen. The act of recoding your consciousness ceases to be an idea or a metaphor. It becomes a living process, a direct, embodied way of perceiving. You begin to sense how simply observing your inner vibration without interference rewires the neural and energetic circuits from the inside out. That's where the next phase begins, the practical act of recoding itself, the moment when awareness stops being abstract and starts becoming action. Close your eyes for a moment. Don't try to imagine anything, don't try to fix anything, just feel what's here. Beneath all the thoughts, beneath the quiet movement of breath, there's an emotional vibration already humming through you. It might be subtle or loud or layered with tension. Whatever it is, that vibration is your current code in action. Every reality you experience, every pattern that repeats, is being projected from this inner frequency. To recode your consciousness is not to replace that feeling. It's to see it so clearly that it dissolves into a new signal. Recoding begins with observation, not effort. You're not trying to install a new version of yourself. You're simply allowing awareness to rewrite the old one through direct attention. The mind often believes change comes from doing, from repetition, affirmation, or strategy. But consciousness updates itself through recognition. What you see without judgment cannot keep running unconsciously. That is the first law of recoding. Awareness rewires automatically. Think of your neural patterns like pathways carved through a forest. Every time you react to life in the same way, anger, worry, guilt, you walk the same trail, pressing it deeper. Recoding doesn't bulldoze the forest, it opens new paths. When you observe your emotion instead of identifying with it, neurons begin forming alternate routes. The chemical feedback loop between brain and body shifts. You literally start broadcasting a different electromagnetic signal. Try to sense this in real time. Bring to mind a recent moment that carried emotional charge, something unresolved, perhaps an interaction that left residue. Feel it as energy rather than story. Where does it live in your body? Behind the ribs? In the throat? The act of naming it isn't the point. The point is to stay present with its frequency, without trying to push it away or explain it. As you hold awareness steady, something subtle happens. The vibration changes texture. It starts to lose density, like ice warming back into water. That melting is the field recoding itself. You might notice that the mind tries to interfere, to analyze the process. It asks, is this working? Am I doing it right? That's the old code trying to regain control. Recoding can't be done through control, because control itself is part of the outdated pattern. The new program installs through surrender. Observation without tension is the master key. The field receives that neutrality as a signal of coherence, and coherence reorganizes everything. Quantum biology is beginning to confirm what mystics have practiced for centuries, that emotion reorganizes matter through electromagnetic resonance. When an emotional pattern stabilizes, it alters gene expression, hormone release, and even the shape of cellular membranes. When awareness interrupts that loop, biology adapts. Your cells begin reading a new energetic language. This is why deep emotional presence can sometimes bring immediate physiological relief. It's not magic, it's a frequency update. At first, the process may feel ordinary, almost too simple. The mind expects fireworks, visions, confirmation. But true recoding feels more like exhalation. You release the resistance that kept the old signal looping. Space opens, thought slows, the nervous system quiets, and out of that stillness, new information begins to rise, not as an idea, but as a feeling of clarity. You might suddenly know what to say, what to do, or realize that no action is needed at all. The field, now coherent, delivers its next instruction. In this way, recoding is not a ritual, but a relationship with your own awareness. Every emotion becomes a doorway. Fear points to where energy is constricted. Shame reveals where self-love has been fragmented. When these vibrations are met with presence, they reintegrate into the whole. You don't transcend emotion, you translate it back into light. Each moment of acceptance writes a new line in your internal script, changing how the universe responds to you. It's important to understand that this process doesn't erase the past. The past remains as data, but no longer as destiny. Once a frequency is seen, it stops repeating because it no longer vibrates unconsciously. That's what liberation feels like, not escape from life, but freedom inside it. The circumstances may look similar, but the charge is gone. You move through the same scene as a different frequency, and therefore the scene responds differently. Notice also how this process alters time perception. When you stop reacting from memory, the future stops being a projection of the past. The field starts generating new probabilities because your internal signal no longer insists on repetition. This is the true meaning of creating reality, not fabricating outcomes but opening the channel through which infinite outcomes can emerge. Recoding, then, is not an act of force but an act of recognition. Each breath becomes a micro-reset, each pause a portal to update the code. And because awareness itself is non-linear, every moment of presence updates all versions of you, past and future, simultaneously. The entire timeline begins to align under one coherent frequency, consciousness remembering itself. You might already be sensing that something subtle shifts each time you rest in observation. The air feels lighter, your body quieter, your thoughts less sharp-edged. These are not small effects. They are signs that the field has begun recalibrating to your inner state. What once took years of repetition now happens almost instantly, because the operating system of your consciousness is updating in real time. And as the new coherence stabilizes, a different kind of awareness emerges, one that sees not only the self, but the entire universe as a single conscious organism, responding to its own vibration. From here, the next level of understanding becomes inevitable. What happens when that vibration reaches full coherence, when consciousness and universe become indistinguishable, when awareness awakens as the universe itself? The quantum code was never a mystery hidden in distant galaxies. It has always been pulsing inside your own awareness. Every thought, every silence, every breath has been writing reality from the inside out. When you stop chasing meaning and begin listening to the quiet space between thoughts, you remember, the universe is not separate from you. It's your own consciousness unfolding in form. If you felt something shift within you, even slightly, that's not coincidence. It's your code responding, awakening, aligning. Don't ignore it. Let it expand. Write the words, "I am remembering the code" in the comments, so I'll know you made it to the end and that the signal reached you. And if this message resonated with you, watch one of the videos now appearing on your screen. The journey goes deeper, and the field is already guiding you to the next revelation.